All right, man, peace. So, the all-time great role player, Scottie Pippen, was recently on The Jump on ESPN, and he gave his testimony in regards to his perspective on whether or not NBA beefs ever truly get resolved. And when I say all-time great role player, that's not an insult. That's not an attempt to denigrate Scottie at all, but that's what he was. Now, you could be an all-time great role player and still be one of the top 50 all-time players to ever play. Dennis Rodman was a role player. Kevin McHale was a role player. They were not the lead guy, but they were still top 50 all-time to ever play because of the diversity of skills that they brought to the game. Okay? When you talk about alphas, lead dogs on their team, there's not but 15 or 20 all-time great guys that really are on that list. Now, sometimes you have partnerships like a Shaq and Kobe, even though Shaq was a little bit above Kobe. You have Dr. J and Moses. Sometimes you have those level of partnerships. Scottie was not on the level to be a partner to Michael. But the diversity of skills that Scottie brought to the game, defense, rebounding, passing, spot scoring, even though he was not a good player in the clutch, made him an all-time great. And Scottie was an all-time great. For people who did not get to see Scottie play, if they want to understand what his style of play was like, it was similar to a Kawhi Leonard, even though he was not as good a shooter as Kawhi Leonard is right now. All right? Kind of like if you were to mix a Kawhi Leonard with a Giannis Antetokounmpo. That's kind of what Scottie brought to the table. But he was not as good a shooter as Kawhi.
Scottie, when you think back to your era, which people are always like, oh, back then, guys really, they meant it when they had beef or whatever. Have those wounds healed 20 years later or not so much?
I don't think so. They really never heal. I can look back at my years playing against the Pistons. Those wounds haven't healed yet. The battles that we had taken, the hard fouls that we took, them throwing me into the cameras. I've never forgotten about those days, and it's something that, as a player, you have to live with, but you don't forget about those days, and you sort of keep that on your mind, and it's a little bit of a hate. You don't like that person anymore.
Of course, and that's expected, especially when guys were trying to hurt you. I've seen a lot of guys come on the internet and say, well, the bad boy Pistons, they were no different from the Celtics or the Sixers in regards to the level of fouls that they gave out. No, man. No. Now, you had certain guys, you had certain guys on the Celtics that, they would get chippy, but not like the Pistons. The Pistons tried to hurt you. Like Lambeer and those guys, they tried to hurt you. Lambeer, Mahorn, Rodman, they would try to hurt you. Isiah Thomas, he would get his little cheap shots in. The only guy who was clean on the Pistons was Dumars. Now, they were an all-time great team, and they had Hall of Fame players, plural. Like, you had about 3 or 4 guys on those Pistons teams that are in or should be in the Hall of Fame, because Mark Aguirre should be a Hall of Famer. All right. Even Bill Lambier, to me, is a borderline Hall of Famer. Of course, Isiah Thomas is the greatest small man to ever play. Better than Allen Iverson. Better than Allen Iverson. Okay? Simple as that. Allen Iverson was his generation's Russell Westbrook. A transcendent talent who really didn't understand the game. But that's neither here nor there. But Joe Dumars, of course, Hall of Famer. Dennis Rodman, Hall of Famer. They had Adrian Dantley, who's a Hall of Famer, replaced by Mark Aguirre, who should be in the Hall of Fame. They had a lot of talent, but they were extremely, extremely dirty. So it does not surprise me when Scottie says what he says, because they were willing to break people's necks, literally. All right, they tried to break Jordan's neck, literally.
And you're not going to change because time heals it. Time didn't heal those scars that I still see on my face. It hasn't been enough time.
And that's why Isiah Thomas got that blow from Karl Malone that he got. For those of you who've never seen it, you should look it up on YouTube. Isiah Thomas, Karl Malone. Isiah Thomas drove to the basket. And, well, let me provide some context for what happened with Isiah Thomas and Karl Malone. For those of you who don't know, most of you know this by now, but, Dream Team won. Not just Michael Jordan, and not just the other players on the team, but even NBC executives like Dick Ebersol did not want Isiah Thomas on the Dream Team because they felt like the Detroit Pistons were a very, very poor representation of what they wanted the NBA to be about going into the 90s. So, of course, they did not allow Isiah Thomas on the team. He should have been on the team, but they did not allow it. Instead, they chose John Stockton, who's also an all-time great player, probably top 30 to ever play. And, the next season, Isiah Thomas came in and he decided, or really before the Dream Team, after they chose the Dream Team, I believe, in the 91 offseason. So the 91-92 season, I believe it was, Utah came to Detroit and Isiah Thomas gave John Stockton like 45 points, something like that. Just baking him, cooking him the whole game. Going through the legs 5,000 times, pulling up in his face, everything, just embarrassing him. So then they go down to Utah and he's cooking him again. And he decides to drive to the basket, and Karl Malone hits him with a forearm to the eye, busts his whole forehead open. I mean, I believe he needed like 40 some odd stitches. He had to be walked off the court. Blood was gushing. Okay, and Karl Malone, I can't remember if he got kicked out the game or not. Like, that was a different era. You had the flagrant 1 and flagrant 2 setup back then, because that had just been initiated, I believe, in the 90 or the 91 season. But I don't even believe he got kicked out the game. And just to show you how big of bullies the Pistons were back then, none of those guys tried to fight Karl Malone other than Darryl Walker. Darryl Walker was the only guy who tried to fight Karl Malone. And for those of you who don't know who Darryl Walker was a nut job, like some 6'4", 6'5" guy coming off the bench. He was in the league for a while. He was with the Knicks with Bernard King. He's with the Pistons. I believe he was with the Bullets in like the late 80s. And he even came to Chicago in 93. And he was on that last Bulls team that beat Phoenix before Jordan retired the first time. Anyway, Darryl Walker was the only guy who came off the bench trying to fight Karl Malone. Bill Laimbeer didn't try to fight him. None of them guys tried to fight Karl Malone. So that showed you that they was all bullies.
That's interesting. Well, I mean, I asked because I have been in places with you and Isiah Thomas, and you guys are cordial, but you're not friendly with each other.
No, we're not friendly. I mean, we had some tough battles on the basketball court, and there were some things that were done on the court that I felt like no player should have to receive. And I think the league allowed them to get away with a lot of it. And today's game is much more cleaner. And
let me also say this. Rod Thorne, who was also the person who drafted Michael Jordan, he was the GM of the Bulls before Jerry Krause got there. He was on record as stating, if you ever see that feature that ESPN did on the Bad Boys, which was a very good documentary on the Bad Boys, he stated that the NBA allowed a little bit too much physicality in the late 80s. And that's the real reason why they kind of wanted that image of the Bad Boys to kind of be expunged from the NBA from the 1990s onward, because they had a different image that they had planned for the NBA, particularly since they wanted it to go global. So David Stern and Dick Ebersol teamed up together in regards to the business image that they wanted for the NBA. And Michael Jordan was going to be the person that they would use. Why not? He had a great image, and he was the best player in the NBA. Okay, so there was a lot that went into why Isiah Thomas was not allowed on the Dream Team, even though he deserved to be there.
It's not guys that are trying to take out other players. And I felt like during that time, they were doing anything they could to beat us.
Well, they definitely were. And, you see a lot of the LeBron guys and the Kobe guys, but especially a lot of the LeBron fans who are trying to bring down Jordan's image to make LeBron out to be as good as Jordan. They'll go on and on about the Bad Boy Pistons. The Bad Boy Pistons were a great team. All right? They were very similar, in fact, to the modern-day Golden State Warriors. But they were allowed to do things back then that they would not be allowed to do. And you see, as soon as they were no longer allowed to do those things, they got swept. Nothing against them. They were great. And they also had a lot of injuries and a lot of mileage by the time they got to the Bulls in 91. But when you look at their record against most of the teams in the playoffs during that era in the late 80s, they were destroying everybody except for the Bulls. Jordan was the only one giving them a run in the playoffs. He took them to 6 in 89. He took them to 7 in 1990. Nobody else was even giving them a run in that era. And that was with a very immature Chicago Bulls team. As soon as that team matured, the Pistons got swept. But, once again, you can understand why Pippen still holds on to that. Because when you feel like someone is so desperate to beat you that they're going to try to take away your health and your livelihood, of course you're going to take that personally.
What if Bill Laimbeer had called you a cupcake? Would you
I'm sure Laimbeer called him much worse than that.
Would you have felt good?
You know what? I don't even want to go in there. Bill Laimbeer don't have a great relationship as
wow, this is good stuff.
Well, I mean, but your point is, so that's interesting, because I think that we sit on the sidelines and say, oh, they're all going to be friendly and the jersey retirement 20 years from now. But when I see guys from your era, what you say bears out. You guys are not.
Well, what about your teammates? What about your teammates that, they didn't win a championship?
He didn't have anything as combustible,
I never had any teammates. Michael Jordan never left and...
Well, he left. He just
hurt us like that. But, yeah, you're right.
I do want to get back to something.
Well, yeah, Jordan left, but he didn't leave you for another team. Right? That's what Scottie's trying to say. Right? Michael left, but he didn't leave us for somebody else. He didn't leave and go to the Knicks. That's Scottie's point. But do I believe that guys like Westbrook and Durant will ever be friends again? No, I do not. I think that they'll be cordial at some point in their lives. But Westbrook comes off to me as a very loyal person. So people who are extremely loyal, when they feel like they've been betrayed, they never get over it and they never forgive. And it's understandable, because if somebody will snake you once, they'll snake you again. And I'm sure that he believes that Durant snaked him. The problem with Durant is that Durant is one of these guys who wants to act like he's a real friend when he's only a workplace friend. And I think that when you're a workplace friend, there are certain things that you do to show somebody that you're just a workplace friend. When you try to act like you're a real friend and then you do things like what he did, that's an infraction that cannot be forgiven. Loyal people are like that. When you're loyal and you feel like you've been done dirty, you can't forgive. All right? You might move past it and be cordial, be civil, but everybody doesn't have to be buddy-buddy. So that's not going to happen. And in regards to the era that Pippen came up in, that was a blood sport era. As I've stated, it is a little overrated where they try to act like everybody was enemies. No, everybody was not enemies, but back then you did not really have the free agency level that you have today. And the AAU program was not as fully developed as it is today. All right. But, contrary to what people think, guys didn't know each other from high school, like Jordan and Ewing. And, they knew each other from high school. Right. They played in tournaments together from high school. Like the great wide receiver Chris Carter is on record as saying that he saw Jordan from the late 70s. He saw him at a tournament in Pittsburgh in the late 70s, where he was dominating from high school at the tournament. He also saw Ewing there. So, I mean, those guys, they got around from back then, but it wasn't as cordial and as buddy-buddy as you had from the late 90s. But, that's why, you have different eras. Different eras have different standards of decorum and etiquette, sports etiquette. But that era in the late 80s, early 90s especially, really throughout the 80s into the early 90s, that was a very feudalistic era. Guys did not really intermingle too much. But anyway, peace.